1. Any more questions? 2, 3, 4. Okay, number 1.
Okay, I've got so many questions coming to mind.
Name and branch, please.
Stephen Booth, Houston Birmingham branch. I suppose my key question is you talked about building houses, particularly social houses. I live basically across the road from where the Silvermere Centre used to be, previously Silvermere School.
Yeah, okay, I know.
Sheldon.
Sheldon, yeah.
Yeah. And recently there was 125 homes built there. Somehow Persimmons, the builder, managed to get away with building only 5 social houses, and literally you could fit all 5 of them in this room. By which I mean this room when the shutters are pulled across.
Sizing.
Yeah, and they were going £125,000. I'm on a fairly good wage on top of GR4, so I could afford £125, £125,000. That's not what I call social housing. And then we've got same builder site, you talk about 4 or 5 bedroom houses, 4 bedroom houses there, probably fit 3 of them in both rooms together. Yeah, they're about £500,000 each. I don't know that many families have got to spend £500,000. So what can you, the larger you, the council, do to actually make sure that these builders, because you said Birmingham Municipal Housing Trust is building, was it 500 a year?
Roughly 500 a year.
500 a year. That's not going to get us to, what was it, 51,000.
It's not going to get us
2031. So you're going to be reliant on private sector builders. So what are you going to do? Because I talked to colleagues in planning, and they're like, these builders, they know every trick in the book, and in the second volume and the third volume on how to get out of building social housing. So what can the council do to make sure they do build social housing, and they don't say, oh well, yeah, but if it's too onerous, we don't have to.
Take all the questions.
Can I borrow your pencil up, because otherwise I feel like, what was that
Okay.
question?
Okay, number 2. Number 2.
Yeah, it's not to speak. CW, Midland number 1 branch. I was on the housing committee in the late 90s. In fact, I was the vice chair at that time. And we had 365 tower blocks in the city at the time. And I remember because it was one for every day of the year, varying leap years, you know. And now it's 214. 13, I was overestimated. So quite a bit of demolition since then, you know. So, and although people say, you know, that tower blocks do have their drawbacks, I think they do have the families particularly. And at the same time, they're a very good way of housing people. You know, so that's the one point I just want to doubt us. I don't imagine we'll be building tower blocks in the near future. But I was a bit surprised about what you said about in the budget, Hammond did lift the cap on the housing revenue cap. And then that is important. I mean, I don't know what extent it's lifted is, because obviously if you've got more ability to pay interest, which is what you use the housing revenue cap for, then you're in a position to borrow more capital so you can build more. You know, so I mean, so that is an important concession. I mean, I think the government have made some concessions, so we've got lots of criticism of them, as we all have, you know. So, I mean, but yes, so the issue is, can we continue and accelerate the level of new build, especially for rent in the city, because that's what we really need. Affordable housing is 10% below, or is it 20% below the market level? It's not that bloody wonderful, actually. So what we really need is on the municipal trust to build more housing. So a few more comments on that, Sharon. And thank you and welcome to you, by the way, for coming. It's great to see somebody.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3. That's right, number 3.
Thanks for the talk, Sharon. I think you've covered these points, but have you identified all the land that you need in the city? And the mixture of housing, have you sorted out what sort of housing that you're going to do? Are you going to have flats or multiple occupied places? And perhaps finally is, are you going to have an influx of people from other areas in Britain who, because they can't provide the services there, that Birmingham are going to accept more people?
Thank you. And finally, number 4.
Yeah, Stuart Richardson, National Education Union. A sort of question and comment. Sharon quoted that from 2009 to 2018 that 1,700 have been built to rent and 1,300 for sale. Now that's 330 a year. Now, a city with 1 million people, 330 a year is a bit small, isn't it? It's ridiculously small. And basically the problem we've got in Britain is that whereas in the 1950s and 60s, for instance, the Tory government of 1953 built 250,000 council houses, you have virtually all the building is private developers, you know, and private builders. And these people don't want to build too many, because if you build too many, you have a problem with their profit margins. Now, because that sort of free market ideology has dominated, you've destroyed the public building. But it's not just the Tories. I mean, actually, I think last year 1,840 council houses were built. It's a ridiculous number, isn't it? Really small. But under Tony Blair, under 2004, only 404 were built. You know, and that's true in terms of the general house building. In the last year of the Blair government, 110,000 houses were built. Last year, 217 houses built. So that period of the Blair government, I think, is a major contributor to the housing crisis we have today, you know, of not building council housing, not building public housing, and just leaving it to the market. The actual Tories, bizarrely, have actually made a turn, and are actually, you know, this thing about the lifting the cap, etc., which enables council housing, councils to build more council housing. They are building more council housing. So it shows a desperate need for different sets of policies in the Labour Party, it seems to me, because the previous era was so disastrous in terms of creating this terrible crisis of hundreds of people on the streets of, you know, around the country, you know, sleeping rough. And unless there's a substantial thing for a complete rebalancing, and that the minority should be privately built and the majority should be public, you cannot solve the housing crisis.
Thank you. George, I have 4 questions.
Yeah, I'll start backwards. Start with Stuart. The numbers in terms of BMHT that I've quoted, remember that's what the council's built.
Yeah.
We're not the only builders in terms of social housing in the city. That is what we're talking about. Council housing, that's what we built within the constraints of the budget and everything else.
Yeah.
You have to also remember that the housing associations also build, so they also contribute to the number of build houses that are built in.
It was 50 or something.
Around about 50 on average a year. That's what they contribute, and we do have the private developers as well. But again, it's all within the kind of confines of what the resources that we've got to deliver those. And at the moment, I mean, it might not sound like a big amount that the council has built, but for us to be, in terms of our building arm, the trust, being the largest council house builder in the country, that just goes to give you an indication of what councils are building across the country in its entirety. You know, we're the ones that are producing the biggest numbers, and although we're saying we are the largest in the country, we're still saying we've got a long way to go and there's still more for us to do. In terms of the housing crisis, there's other things that are indicators towards that, and that is also things like the right to buy. Because what you have to understand is that what we're sitting at the moment is one of the reasons why we've got such a shortage of council properties is because of the original right to buy. We've lost a huge stock of that, and we've continued to lose a huge stock of that. And now with this voluntary right to buy for housing associations are also thinking, well, actually, we're now going to lose stock. And in their caveat, they have to build for everyone that they've lost. But if they sold one in Birmingham to a tenant, it doesn't mean that they have to build back one in Birmingham. It can be elsewhere that they can have that stock. So there's a number of housing factors that added up towards the housing crisis. And one of it is around people being pushed further into poverty. You know, we can't run away from that. And also there is an increase of the private rented sector. And one of the things that we have to do is, because we know that about 60% of the housing market in the city is the private rented sector, we have to do a lot of work with that sector at the moment. So we're doing some work around, particularly around road landlords. We've had some money to do some work around road landlords, but also we've got together with a number of the private rented sector to ask them what is it that they need from the council in terms of the current crisis, in terms of us being able to put people into their housing as well, because we cannot continue just to leave people in temporary accommodation. So I think there's a huge number of factors that add into that. And, you know, I accept the fact that it might not sound like huge numbers that we're building, but, you know, it's more than what, that just shows you what the crisis is across the country. In terms of the question around the land mixture, the mixture of the properties, the tenure types, we are looking at all tenure types. And in terms of the influx of people that are being accepted, let me just ask you the question further on that. Do you mean in terms of the waiting list for the council?
I just meant the developing pressure that you've got to supply housing to people. And you've got the gradual growth of the population within Birmingham, but are you having to accept people from outside Birmingham to put more pressure on you to provide more houses?
So there's two different types of pressure. There's over the coming years, we know with all the development that's happening across the city, in terms of HS2 coming, and you know there's been big developers coming towards the city, it's going to increase jobs, then that's going to attract people from other regions, other parts of the country, and that's what we've forecasted a part of. But also we've had things where, particularly where we've had at the moment some boroughs in other cities where, you know, their affordable rent compared to Birmingham's affordable rent is two different caveats. So we have had instances where we've had families that have been moved from another city into Birmingham, and the difficulty around looking at that was that they went into the private rented sector. So the other thing that we have to really push for is the laws and the legislation around the private rented sector, because at the moment not everybody has to register with the council to let them know that they're a private landlord. So that's something that we're looking at, and I don't know if you know that last year we did some consultation in 3 particular areas in the city around selective licensing, asking residents, would you want a selective licensing scheme in this area? Because that would give us more powers in order to find out who the private landlords are, but also making sure that their behaviours are better as well. So we are looking at a different mixture. It's not just going to be one size fits all. In terms of the tower blocks, I totally understand what you're saying. I used to live in tower blocks when I lived in Lee Bank, so I remember when that went through its redevelopment. We have got less tower blocks through regeneration, but we're not, you know, as much as we're not intending at the moment to build more tower blocks, we are renewing some of them. So if you look around the city, like Ladywood, you'll see that some of the blocks have been renovated and done up and brought up to a more modernised standard in terms of their windows and everything else. We are continuing to do that, and we have been doing that over the last few years to updating those tower blocks. There are some places where there's regeneration where, you know, some tower blocks will come down, and it's consultation with those tenants as well about what is the preferred option. But we also have to look at the fact that some people are telling us, and quite a few people are telling us, that, you know, they might have been in a tower block for 10, 15, 20 years and their family size has grown. They need bigger spaces and they need a new home. So we can't always retain the number of tower blocks that we've got in the city. But the ones that we do keep, we are looking at renovating them. We are not the only ones to have tower blocks. There's more tower blocks in the city than what we've got. Housing associations as well, and there are some private blocks as well. In terms of the capital borrowing cap, we have used the money from the borrowing, but ultimately it's still a debt. it's still something that we have to repay
That's
back.
what the rent's for.
Yeah, I know that's what the rent's for, but there's a limit of how much, you know, how much more debt do we continuously have to take on, and you have to look at it over the overall budget of the HRA. So there's always questions around when the auditors look at it. They always look at, it's like if you went to borrow a loan from the bank, don't they? They look at how much have you already borrowed so far. So we do, you know, the effect that it's going to have on Birmingham, we are already in the position where we are using money that we're borrowing to build, and we'll continue to do that. But the removal of the borrowing cap isn't going to make a significant difference for us in the situation that we are in at the moment, because we are already building the properties. That's why we are the biggest builder across the country in terms of the council. And Sheldon, very interesting. Housing split between two portfolios, so it's mine and part of it is and in the economy. But with the development plan, when was those properties built?
They finished them they finished the first one's about 2.5 years ago, the last one's probably just shy of 18 months ago.
Right, okay. Because the Birmingham development plan looks at how we're going to distribute the numbers of properties that we need to build across the city, and it does already identify some of the land, and some of the questions that you've raised was already put into that plan, and the questions were around it.
The lock-up garages next to the block, they've got, apparently there's going to be another 4 houses built where the lock-up garages used to be,
Okay.
and not social houses.
Okay. So we look at the amount of social housing that they're going to build across the city, and we disproportionate like that. But the thing is, the plan was adopted in January 2017. But I will go away and I will look and give you a firm answer around the Sheldon one, because I'm not familiar with that site. But I will go and look into it and come back to you. But in terms of sometimes we are trying to work more with the developers and push them in a way that we're saying to them, actually we need more social housing, and at the moment we try and push them around the 15%, but the reality for them, they're developers, and you know the way that they look at it. But what I do at the moment, yes, because they're thinking of, but at the moment I sit on the Combined Authorities Land and Housing Delivery Board, and then we look at it from across the region, because if we only solely look at it from city, what happens is we're concentrated like this, and if the prices are lower in other areas, it pushes up in different areas, and it makes an impact on the way that developers want to develop. They look at other areas more favourably, so we're looking at it more stretched out across the combined authority, so that there's more evenness across the city and into other local authorities. And the reality of it is where the shortfall will come for us when it comes to 2031, it is going to be in the other neighbouring local authorities as well, because of the land space. So the questions that you're asking, we are looking at that. But what I will do is I'll go away and send an email and get you a more defined answer, and I'll send it back through the chair. Is that okay?
Okay, we need to move on now. But if we can thank Sharon for an excellent contribution and replies to questions tonight.